Thank you so much for coming to the screening of The Searchers. I asked
a friend and a great filmmaker to help me with the introduction. Is Alexander Payne. You know him for The Holdovers, Sideways, Election. And he's in a different continent, so he's joining us via Zoom. And here is Alexander Payne talking about The Searchers.
Hello. I wish I were there with you. I'm in Athens, Greece right now. Okay, shall I start? All right, very good. The Searchers. The captivity narrative in Western culture begins with the Iliad. The men barge off to fetch the captive women and to avenge her capture brutally. And I think this is part of understanding the enduring and unsettling power of the Searchers. Its psychosexual element triggers something already bedded deep inside of us. Just as part of the enduring power of zombie and vampire movies, if you'll go with me, is that they mirror domestic abuse and incest. The victim becomes the perpetrator. So it is that the horror of seeing our women captured and ravaged, if not killed, by the savage other, has likely for millennia produced avenging monster heroes. In this version, we have two monster heroes. We have Ethan Edwards, played by John Wayne, and the other is a Native American man named Scar. In a terrific book on the making of The Searchers, Glenn Frankel tells us that the captivity narrative is Puritan North America's oldest literary genre, beginning in 1682 with the memoir of one Mary Rowlandson, a woman captured along with her children by Narragansett Indians. It was, he tells us, America's first bestseller. And throughout our history, accounts of white women living among Native Americans continued to be popular. As we still observe to this day, many puritanical fundamentalist religious believers place so much value on female chastity and honor that they must punish not only the captors, but also the victimized woman herself, for she has already suffered in their terrible judgment, a fate worse than death. The Searchers is loosely based on the true story of Cynthia Ann Parker, a 9-year-old girl who, together with 4 brothers, was kidnapped in a murderous raid by the Comanches in East Texas in 1836. Her uncle, a man named Captain James Parker, searched for these children for 8 years and succeeded in capturing back the boys, but not Cynthia Ann. She was not found and returned to white culture until 24 years later in 1860, by dint of yet another murderous raid, this time of Texas Rangers and volunteers killing Comanche. During those 24 years, Cynthia Ann had married a Comanche man and had borne him 3 Comanche children, 2 sons and a daughter. She was never to see her sons again, and her daughter, ferried back with her into white culture, died 4 years later. Cynthia Ann Parker herself died not many years after that, years of misery during which she never stopped longing to return to Comanche society. Think of how this woman suffered. Twice the victim of an attack in which she witnessed the violent deaths of people she loved, and twice carted off against her will into a different civilization. Let's cut now to the early 1950s when a prolific novelist and screenwriter, Alan LeMay, finds himself in Texas directing a B-Western. And he hears this story, by now a legend, reinterpreted, even mythologized over the previous 100 years. Thinking it good fodder for a book, he wraps his movie and travels to East Texas, where he interviews members of the Parker family and produces a fine, if grim, text first published as The Avenging Texans in the Saturday Evening Post, later renamed for the novel as The Searchers. In it, LeMay focuses not on Cynthia Ann Parker herself, but rather on that obsessed Uncle James. and he invents a fictional adopted brother who also goes on the search, on the quest. Colorful veteran producer Marion C. Cooper, King Kong, and many, many John Wayne pictures to his credit, and many other films you've heard of, secures the rights to the book in partnership with one Cornelius Vanderbilt Whitney, a wealthy financier backer buying his way into the movies. It's a phenomenon we still see today. Soon they take it to John Ford, who, even with his reputation as a master director, was experiencing a bit of a career slump. During the making of Mr. Roberts, his previous picture, he had been drinking more heavily than usual, had actually punched out Henry Fonda, and he had had to leave the film for emergency gallbladder surgery to be replaced by Mervyn LeRoy. Excuse me. This film was to return him to his beloved Monument Valley, where he'd not been since She Wore a Yellow Ribbon, and of course to working with his great alter ego, John Wayne. Whitney paid for the production, with Warner Brothers putting up 30% of the budget and a favorable box office split in exchange for distribution rights. Production began in early 1955, when a reduced crew and stunt doubles for the stars went up to Alberta and Colorado to shoot the snow scenes. June and July, they saw production in Monument Valley with temperatures often hovering around 115 degrees. August was back in Los Angeles for studio photography and one final outdoor scene shot up at Bronson Cave. Bronson Cave is a place right inside the city that had been used since the silent days. Released in April 1956, it made decent money, but overall, its reception was surprisingly tepid. Mixed reviews for what was seen mostly as just another John Wayne Western, not a single Oscar nomination. This after John Ford had already won a record 4 Best Director Oscars, and cinematographer Winton C. Hoch had won 3. And this after both High Noon and Shane had in recent years cleaned up at the box office, and High Noon had won 4 Academy Awards. The jaw-dropping cinematography is one of the many reasons to see this movie. Well, who was Winton C. Hoch? If you're like me, one of your favorite features on TCM are the old MGM James A. Fitzpatrick travelogues, you know, Chile, Land of Charm, and Czechoslovakia on Parade. Well, guess who shot 20 of them? Winnie Hoch. He was an Iowan trained as a chemist at Caltech who went to work in the mid-30s as a color specialist for Technicolor. He soon moved from advisor on those travelogues to cinematographer, and he traveled the world capturing those painterly Technicolor images. He never once shot, in that period, he never once shot black and white. And his 3 Academy Awards were for Joan of Arc, She Wore a Yellow Ribbon, and The Quiet Man. I'm sorry? Okay, all right. Hi, kid. Okay, all right. Now, searchers, I thought somebody had some Winnie Hoch trivia or something. Okay. The Winnie Hoch hobbyist, yeah. Now, The Searchers was shot in VistaVision. What's VistaVision? Okay, well, as movies got wider in the 1950s, Fox gave us CinemaScope using anamorphic lenses, and soon Paramount trotted out VistaVision, which, anticipating IMAX decades later, changed 4-perf vertical frame capture to 8-perf horizontal frame capture, yielding much higher and very beautiful color resolution. About 80 movies were released in VistaVision, starting with White Christmas and ending with One-Eyed Jacks. Tonight's 4K restoration is part of a multi-year collaboration between Turner Classic Movies and the Film Foundation, on whose board I proudly sit, to remaster and restore classic films from the Warner Brothers library. And finally, I'll leave you with a modest consideration of my own. Although they are very different films from very different directors, I personally see a lot of similarities between The Searchers and Vertigo. Released just 2 years apart, both in VistaVision, both about men on an obsessive quest for some version of a dead woman, both considered by many as those directors' dark masterpieces made in maturity at the peak of their powers and resources. Both movies contain towering performances by good guy movie stars now willing to go to the post-war dark side. Both received tepidly upon release, but celebrated decades later. And if we find both movies disturbing, each for its own reasons, in this case, we can have discussions of racism and misogyny. We must also consider that we sometimes judge complicated great artists, not always by what they express, but rather by the beauty, the ambition, and the honesty, warts and all, with which they express it. The Searchers.